Alcoholics Anonymous, and welcome all of you, alcoholics and wives and husbands of alcoholics, to this grand 20th anniversary meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous in New South Wales in Australia. Before introducing your chairman for the evening, I would like to read some cables, among which the first: for your 20th anniversary, my congratulations, my affection. May God prosper you always, ever. Bill W.
I'm going to call on our oldest member, Russ, to give us a talk.
Good night, all. I don't know if anybody else feels the way I feel at this very moment. I feel very humble, very thankful in a lot of ways. I feel thankful for the friends that I've got, the friends I see in this hall tonight. And looking around this hall, I can see people that I knew a way back. There are a bunch of wives sitting over in that side over there. Eileen, Lorna, and Dorothy, a few others. Archie's wife, Elsie. But when we look back on those years that people talk about, the bad old days or the good old days in AA, I can look at these women folk and say, thank God that such people came into my life, because really they did do something for AA. They gave of their best, they gave their husbands, they gave everything that they had. And from them women that stood behind us and helped us along in the hard days when we didn't know which way we were going or what we wanted to do, I say again, thank God. Let me just talk briefly about the old days of AA. I can remember back when there were 5 or 6 of us at a meeting, and I have a book here in front of me that tells us of the growth of Alcoholics Anonymous. On Tuesday, the 28th of August, 1945, the takings of AA, and there was 2, 4, 6, 7, and there was 2 wives and 2 non-alcoholics, and the total takings was 14 shillings. Tuesday, the 4th of September, 1945, the total takings to 12 bob, and there was 2, 4, 6 of us. On Tuesday, the 11th of September, 1945, we took 10 shillings, and there was 2, 4, 5 of us, and there was 2 wives in the 5, and all things like that went on. And the growth of AA, when you come to look at it tonight, and I sat down at the dinner tonight and looked around, my heart was full of gladness that somehow or other that AA had come and was well established. And when I come again to think of all the things that we did and the things that happened and everything else like that, such as the first public meeting that was held in Sydney, it was by, and Frank Sturge Hardy presented pleasant Sunday afternoon at the Lyceum Theatre on Sunday the 9th of February 1946, and we sold 26 shillings worth of the basic concepts of Alcoholics Anonymous. And then again, Sturge Hardy again came to the front, and the first donation that Frank Sturge Hardy gave to us was on Tuesday the 30th of October 1945, and that was the glorious sum of a guinea. Then again, Father Dunlea, on his return from America, where he went to study at Boys Town and visited a lot of AA groups in America, in an island, and we invited him to come and address a combined meeting in the newly formed North Sydney group in the Mater Misericordia Recreation Hall at 8 p.m. on Tuesday the 18th of March 1947. All things like that, all little things, but they made up a wonderful whole, and from out of them grew this. I can tell you again about we fellows that were drunks and we didn't know what to do with ourselves. We came into this organisation which we didn't know anything about, but we did find out that as long as we stopped together, we stopped sober, and these peculiar ideas that we got, we used to wander around the city together, and we'd sort of lived in all sorts of places. One lived out out on the Watson's Bay line. One lived out at Bondi Junction, and I lived in the Glebe, and another one lived out in Manly, and we used to walk around the city of a night time, and we'd ask one another, well, what tram do you get? And somebody'd say, well, I'll get a Bronte tram, and we'd walk up King Street and get to the Bronte tram there in Elizabeth Street, and when the tram came along, he'd turn around and say, well, where do you live? And I'd say, I live in the Glebe, and we'd walk back to George Street and wait for the Glebe tram, and we were that frightened to leave one another that we invented all sorts of excuses like that, and we walked around the streets of Sydney to the early hours of the morning, knowing full well if we stood together, we stood sober. But the very moment that we left one another, we weren't quite sure of where we went or what we were going to do. But we stuck it. We tried to do the best we could with what we had, and we had a big book, and we used to sit down and read a page and a half of it every night, and then talk about it. That's all we knew about Alcoholics Anonymous, but as I said, we tried to do the best we could with what we had. And all things like such as they that went together to make up the whole, and we did try, and it did mean a way back for a lot of us. I remember the first night I seen Archie McKinnon. Archie sat on a bed, and I laid across a bed at the reception house, and for the first time in my life, a man had sat down or took time out or cared enough to tell me exactly what was wrong with me. And in the early hours of the morning, he got up and left me, and he said, I'll see you in the morning. I'll see you in the morning. And he came to see me in the morning expecting me to be dead. And he often says to me, the man that should have been dead, but he wasn't dead. He took me to a doctor the next morning. He took me a doctor in Macquarie Street, Dr. Carter Martis, and Dr. Carter Martis examined me and gave me something, and with that, I turned around and I went and looked for a job, because Dorothy, my wife, said that somehow or other this fellow is worth a chance. And Dorothy said to me after I'd come out of the doctor, what are you going to do? And I said, well, let's try and find a job. And I went and applied down here in the Commonwealth Bank building in the war years, and they gave me a ticket to go to a job, and I never even knew what it was. And when I read on it, it was a kitchen useful. And I didn't even know what a kitchen useful was. And I wandered up to the railways department, and I just left the Macquarie Street doctor, and he didn't hold out too much hopes for me, and Archie thought I should have been dead. And I fronted the railway doctor, and the railway doctor passed me. So I went downstairs, and I seen the lady, and she said, you come back here tomorrow morning and you start work. I said, good. I went home, and Dorothy and I talked about it. In fact, my children and Dorothy and I sat down, and we talked about Alcoholics Anonymous and what I was going to do. And they asked me, was I going to do something? And I said yes. And I walked back to the railway the next morning, and a lady by the name of Mrs. Goff And I fronted up to Mrs. Goff and I said, my name's Jones, I'm to start here this morning. And she gave me an apron, a white apron and a khaki coat, and she said, stand there. And I stood there for about a half an hour, and another woman come along and she said, is your name Jones? I said, yes. She said, come with me, you work with me. I said, fine. So I trotted across the railway station like a little puppy dog. And she stood in front of two great big glass doors, and she put the key in the door and opened the door, and I said, do we work here? She said, yes, you do. And I looked around, it was the wine bar in Central Railway. Central Railway. I said, oh my goodness, what are we going to do? But I didn't know much about Alcoholics Anonymous, but I did know something about it. It had taught me, for what a little I did know, it taught me to stop and pray. And I stopped dead in the doorway of a wine bar in the railway department where I drank for years baby muscat, the bobber bottle, and all things like that. And I walked in, and we worked. And I only struck two fellas that wouldn't accept the explanation that I didn't want to drink. And they were two English sailors that were going to ram a drink down my throat. And I hit one with a pewter mug and the other bloke with the broom. That was the only thing I could do. The only thing I could do. Then after I'd worked in the wine bar for a little while and got used to sweeping up the butts and bringing back the glasses and things like that, and I wasn't frightened of it, they decided that they'd shift me. And you got no idea where they shifted me to the milk bar right opposite. Oh boy, I really had some fun. I really did. I started to drink milk and things like that, and from a skinny scarecrow I started to put on a little bit of weight, and I started to settle down, because I found that everybody that found out what I was trying to do went out of their road to do something for me. In fact, Dorothy, I'm on annual leave at the moment, and on Friday, Dorothy and I walked into Coles, and I walked and looked at the chap, and he said, good day, how are you? I said, fine. He said, don't I know you? I said, yes, we do. He said, are you still with MAA, fellas? I said, yes. He said, fine. He said, do you still believe in the Lord? I said, yes. He said, that's the wonderful part of it, isn't it? That's what makes everything think fine. I said, yes, that's it. That's it. And all things like that, I worked in the railway department, and then I'd seen a notice in a weekly notice that they wanted telegraph operators in the railways department, and I made an application for a position as a telegraph operator, and I got it. Some strange way I got it, and I started as a telegraph operator in the railways department. I was there a few years, and I became the supervisor of Telegraph Railway, and I worked there until I got a big head. My head got that big because I was the supervisor in the telegraph department that you practically had to write a telegram out to talk to me. Truly you did. Truly you did. And one of the secretaries of the railway one afternoon rang to send a telegram through, and I must have been in a pretty stinking lousy mood or something like that, and he said something, and I said, who do you think you're talking to? And he said, I don't know yet, but I'll find out. So I gave him the rounds around the telegraph office verbally, but when he came back and I found out who he was, they shifted me pretty quick smart, and I finished up on the railway department, in the railway department, down on Central Station, pushing a barrow about. But it did teach me something. It did teach me something. It taught me to crawl back and practice these principles in all my affairs. It told me that, and it taught me in no mean manner that if I wanted what I was looking for, I had to give out something in return. And it was not all grab and take. And as I say, my family and my wife and everybody that I came in contact with helped me and went out of their road. At this present moment, I'm still in the railways department, still there, doing the best I can with what I've got. But I'm a little bit further along the road. I am now a personal clerk to the senior engineer in diesel traction in the railways department. And I've done nothing about it. That's the strange part about it. I've just let go. As Clive said, I've let go and let God. I've been contented to do what you people direct me to do. And I believe in what Bill Wilson says to Dr. Bob in the first meeting when he said, I need you people more than ever you could need me. And I do. I really do. And in the final closing, I will tell you something that you mightn't credit. When I say that there is not a person nor anything in the world that hasn't gone out of their road to help me. In my drinking career, I was in Queensland at one time, and I pinched a dog. And he was that big that I could put him in my coat pocket and bring him home. But he grew up a big Queensland blue, and he grew up that way that he'd bite my head off. Every excuse he got to bite me, he bit me. He really did. And if I came home full, this dog wouldn't leave me. He walked between me and the kids, and the very moment that I made the wrong move, the dog at me. But the strange part about it was that the very moment that I started to come back, I started to do something about something. The dog ceased to bite me. In fact, I used to smoke a pipe at them times, and the old dog used to walk around the kitchen of a night time after I'd finished tea, and I'd push my chair back, and he'd pick up a match or anything, and he'd have it in the corner of his mouth, and he'd leap up from the floor and sit on my lap, a great big Queensland blue cattle dog, and me and him sitting at the top of the table smoking a pipe. All things like that. That's, I mean, I had nothing to do with this, nothing at all. Now, as I say, the only thing I had to do was hand my life over completely. And I'll tell you a little secret. It might help somebody that's having a hard battle. In this program here, where it says that we took personal infantry, and when we were wrong, we promptly admitted it. And then when you wrote down all the wrongs that you'd done and were ready to make amends, try it. Just try it. You'd be surprised how that little effort that you sit down and take a personal inventory and write it down in black and white and hand it on to somebody else. I wrote mine a long time ago and still add to it. And the first one, a man is sitting in this room tonight, he has the first one I wrote. And he's never divulged anything. He's never even come to me and made a slur of what's been in that. He read it, folded it up, and put it away. If I wanted back, I'm sure I could go and get it from him. But I don't want it, because it's a yardstick of my behaviour. And as I say in closing, I'm deeply grateful. I'm deeply grateful. And I can hold my head up high. And I can look at everybody in this hall tonight and say, thank God, I'm no longer a miserable, lonely, forsaken and forgotten drunk. I've got 1,000 friends, all for the asking and the giving. So thanks very much, and thanks for listening to me.
Now I'd like to call on Betty H, if she'd be so good as to come up, continue the story.
Well, as you've heard, I'm Betty, and I'm going to warn you I wasn't chosen because I'm a speaker. I was chosen simply because I've been around quite a while. But I'm doing this out of gratitude to AA for all that I have been given. And this is a tremendous night when you think of it, 20 years that this thing has been in Australia. I was fortunate in knowing Father Tom, not because I was one of his good parishioners, but because I was lived in the same street. And through him I was brought into contact with AA. In fact, some of my early associations were right down in the heart of National Park with not only our Sutherland metho drinkers, but with some of the Sydney ones that were brought up there with the hope of bringing them back to life. This thing is, of course, as you all know, you know me and you've known me quite a long time. AA has made a tremendous difference in my life. You couldn't explain it in any other way than it actually gave me an inspiration to live, something I needed, something I didn't have. I found that the inspiration of the meetings, the people, everything about AA appealed to me, and I loved it. I've never been one to argue about the various parts of this program. As it's written, it's meant for me. Accepted it and been content with it, and found that everything that it says it will do, it does. There is only the one qualification, that you need this thing desperately. In my case, that was true. I was a young woman with a young family, and in the case of a woman with a family, it is a very desperate thing. Men, well, they have their own lives and they get away with things a lot, but there's something dreadful about a mother who is an alcoholic. But you know, one of the wonderful things about this AA, my husband is here tonight, and I don't think that he will mind me saying this, but my youngest daughter said to me some years ago, she said, "Are you going to a meeting again tonight, Mum?" And I said, "Yes." Well, she said, "I don't know. If you haven't got Dad sober by this time, well, you're never going to get him sober." Well, now that might seem hard on poor old Dad, but what a remarkable thing when you think about it, that my daughters, particularly daughters, have been saved the fact of knowing that their mother was drinking and all these things. Well, I owe, apart from my gratitude to AA for this, the fact that it has existed in AA for such a long time, which was wonderful for me, that I was given the opportunity to come so early, where so many have to wait so long. But the wonderful thing is that in those times my husband stood behind me. If I remember rightly, I don't remember him drinking at that particular period, when perhaps it would have been quite dangerous for me, and he was just as helpful in the 12-step work that I had to do. Many a drunk lay wrapped up in our dining room carpet, I can assure you, and with my husband helping to nurse him. But personally, I don't think that a member stays around AA out of the goodness of their own heart, that they're very good-natured or very fine-natured or anything. They stay around AA because they really need it. That's been necessary to me, and I think that it will continue to be necessary to me. The ones that I give credit to are the early ones, the early people that founded this thing in this country, that work so hard, who put up with a lot of unrealistic people and stood for a lot of things, stood for a lot of abuse, some of them, and still stand for a lot of abuse, some of them that have put a tremendous amount of lot of work into AA. The members themselves have to come to AA and stay with it if they want to be sober. But those people at that particular time didn't have to bother. Some of them had to bother later, I believe, but at that particular time they didn't have to bother. So I'd like to finish on that note that I give thanks and feel great gratitude for the fact that this thing has carried on in this country for this time. Thank you.
Now I'd like to call on Dr. M. Is Ron any taller, Doctor?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sober and I'm an alcoholic. Very, very glad to be here tonight. Mine goes back very many years, 20 years ago, when I was losing everything through drink, and there was no answer to it. At that time, I had heard about Alcoholics Anonymous. We had the idea of introducing it into Australia. And I experimented around Sydney for 3 years, trying to find an alcoholic to start Alcoholics Anonymous on. There was not an alcoholic I could find around Sydney. And if someone turned around to me and said, well, if you want to find an alcoholic, why not try yourself? Well, it happened at that time that we had a man in Sydney, and I think that AA in Australia owes more to him than to any other man I know of, and that's the late Father Richard Murphy. And Father Richard Murphy did more to encourage us and encourage the growth of AA than any other person. He also knew Father Tom, and he also knew his interest in AA. And Father Tom and I, he brought us together, and Father Tom and I used to go around the metho camps around Sutherland trying to get AA going. And we were useless. We got kicked out of everywhere by the police. Everywhere we went, the police followed us up and kicked us out. And it happened at that time that Archie McKenna, also at the reception house, was working for the same purpose. And I suppose if you travel the length and the breadth of Australia, you wouldn't find more persons more unsuitable to start anything in the organisation. Both Father Tom and I were erratic, and we still erratic, and I think that Father Tom will forgive me for saying so. But I don't think, when you analyse it, we couldn't have had anyone better. Father Tom at that time was making headline news in the newspaper because he was a war to daggers drawn with the Southern Shire Council over his boys' town. And he was big publicity at the time. I was also a noted drunken psychiatrist. I thought that I wasn't, but I was. Everyone in Newcastle, Goulburn, and many other towns knew I was an alcoholic, knew I was a drunkard, and that it was impossible for me to have charge of alcoholics as I did, both at Kenmore and also at the reception house Sydney and elsewhere. And that was the paradox of paradoxes, that I, as a psychiatrist and as superintendent of various reception houses, tried to treat alcoholics. That is the question of the blind leading the blind. And one thing I have learned from that is this, that it doesn't matter what we say or do, it's no matter what advice we give. The only thing we have to give the alcoholic is our own example. If we were famous drunkards and then reformed, everyone wants to know how we reformed and what philosophy of life we followed to fight sobriety. And the other one was Archie McKenna, and Archie was an attendant at the reception house. And Archie knew the alcoholics. He knew their hopelessness in dealing with them. And it was essential for him also to find something to do. So there were the three of us, working towards, we all had different characteristics, and yet the three characteristics joined. There's no human agency could join them, only God could have thought of it. We spent 18 months trying to get AA started. And during those 18 months, we committed every possible sin. We did everything possible to wreck AA. We tried everything. We tried arguments. We tried scientific arguments. We tried to prove that I wasn't an alcoholic and that all the others were alcoholics and I wasn't. And I suppose during those 18 months of pulling the something to do. So there were the three of us, working towards, we all had different characteristics, and yet the three characteristics joined. There's no human agency could join them, only God could have thought of it. We spent 18 months trying to get AA started, and during those 18 months we committed every possible sin. We did everything possible to wreck AA. We tried everything. We tried arguments. We tried scientific arguments. We tried to prove that I wasn't an alcoholic and that all the others were alcoholics and I wasn't. And I suppose during those 18 months of pulling the AA 12 steps to pieces, in trying to pull every other member to pieces, and in trying to prove them the alcoholics, and also, above all, in trying to organize AA, we made no success. Because during that time of the first crisis in AA came about the spiritual side. AA itself was divided then hopelessly into two parts, the spiritual side and those who did not believe in the spiritual side, because they argued that if you introduced the word God at an AA meeting, you would frighten prospective customers away. But eventually, in sheer desperation, because I was so sick, Father Tom was so sick and the others were so sick, we had tried everything else. By the grace of God, there were no drugs at that time. And I suppose if they had been there, we also would have tried them and become addicted to them. But there was no drugs. And we got sober. Now that was the astonishing position. We were sobriety. And there was no hospital treatment that's necessary. There was no hospital in Sydney would take AA. When I was working in the mental hospital at Rydalmere, I started to treat alcoholics there, and I think Crive was one of my victims and experimental guinea pigs. That's right. And he was about the only one who succeeded in getting sober. The rest fell by the wayside. Then it finished up that I had a most peremptory letter from the mental hospital department to stop AA treating alcoholics, and they regarded me as irresponsible. I suppose they were correct. From a departmental point of view, I was irresponsible. And they told me so. So then it finished up in a terrific brawl that either they had to resign or I had to. So I did. And then I went into private practice. Now then came the astonishing position. At that time, I had been sober about 12 months. And we were getting patients. And the question was what to do with them. It's amazing to know that when the hospital treatment of alcoholics is so popular today, that 15 or 18 years ago there was not one private hospital in Sydney willing to take alcoholics. They were regarded as the scum of the earth, irresponsible, too dangerous to take, and I couldn't persuade for 2 years almost any private hospital in Sydney to treat alcoholics. And then, by a sheer set of circumstances, I met Heidi Bray. At that time, there was a patient in Heidi Bray in America, and I had to send her to America. And I got the mate from Kessel to be escort to America and back to San Francisco. And after that, I persuaded her to take alcoholics, and she was very skeptical about it. But I suppose she gradually got interested in it. And then it took us about 2 or 3 years to perfect the method of treatment of alcoholics. We hear so much today about the modern treatment of alcoholism and drugs and everything else like that. The method that still gives the best result was those that were perfected by the old masters and doctors of 6 or 7 centuries ago. And there were practically no deaths. With the latest methods in America and others, they regard the death rate of like acute alcoholics as 5 or 10%. With the old methods that were used and are still used, the death rate was practically nil. So then Heidi Bray gradually started. And then the problem was a lot of those chaps came from the country, and what were you to do with them? But then there was nothing else to do. but to send them back to the country town and to get them to start an AA group, whatever country town it was. So that, having started the country group, 2 or 3 of us went up and held public meetings up there. Now, public meetings have become very, very popular. I remember the first public meetings we held in Wagga 10 years ago, or 14 years ago. No one turned up to it, except 5 or 6. And they had the idea that if they turned up, any members of the public, they themselves were alcoholics, so they'd get a bad reputation around the town, and no one turned up. And that went on gradually over a number of years, that no one turned up to public meetings, and then gradually we had to start AA, and we had to gradually educate the public to it. In the first lecture, we went to the British Medical Journal, and I took Clive and who's the other one? Fred along. And we addressed the psychiatrist on Alcoholics Anonymous. And I used, as president here tonight, our chairman, and Fred as guinea pigs. And they gave their testimony, and the reception, to say the least of it, was very, very polite, but icy cold. And no one believed in it, and they thought we were quite mad and quite irresponsible. And then we had to gradually go around and around and around, and we had to go around preaching AA and gradually give it an impetus. And it was from there, from adversity, that groups of AA were started. We talk a lot about organisation in AA. Most AA groups have been started by members. And these members in the country town, and I'm very fond of the country towns, and I meet chaps there who have been sober for 10 or 15 years, and they were loners. They started their own groups. Most of them were ex-patients from Heidelberg, and they spread their teaching for 100 miles or more away. And I've been to country meetings where there's 60 or 80 members or 100 members. I was at Coonabarra about a month ago, and there were about 60 chaps turned up, and they were all groups started by a few members. Now, this was the astonishing thing, is that once AA was established, everyone wanted to organise it. Now, that's the astonishing paradox, that AAs, who are quite incapable of managing their own affairs, want to organise everyone else's affairs, and they especially want to organise AA. That began an organisation of AA which went on for 10 years. And during that time, AA was split hopelessly. It was split into groups. They determined what group should be determined and what not. And at times, some of them took it upon themselves to stop new groups being formed. Now, the worst thing on earth you can do is to tell an alcoholic not to do anything, and he immediately sets out to do it. And that's how a lot of groups were started, because they were told not to start them, and they did. And some of those groups were determined. With all this organisation, and I thought, and I and a few other old members of AA thought it was our duty to protect AA from its members. And there again is the astonishing position that we, who cannot protect ourselves, wanted to protect everyone else's. And things went from bad to worse. So, about 5 years ago, 3 or 4 of them came up to me and told me that I was right off beam. I had lost everything, and I'd been off beam for about 2 or 3 years, and everyone knew I was off beam except myself. And then it suddenly struck me that AA is an individual program. It affects us, and the only duty we have is to keep sober ourselves, because that's the only thing we have to give other members. I have gone through that period, and I've seen hundreds of others go through the period of analysing AA, analysing themselves, trying to find out what the cause of alcoholism is and trying to find out for everything else. It doesn't matter in the slightest what's the cause of alcoholism, and it doesn't concern you. Even the greatest experts I know of know nothing about the causes of alcoholism. How then can any member of AA know anything about it? And I suppose that after 20 years' experience, all I know is how little I do know. The wise man in AA knows he does not know. The foolish man does not know that he does not know. And then, when they told me that about 4 or 5 years ago, I suddenly realised that the only thing I have to offer is sobriety. And if my own sobriety is good, others want it. If it's no good, no one wants it. And all I can do is simply convey the message of alcoholics, of AA, to other members. And the AA member has to stand rigidly on his own 2 feet. He dare not take drugs. He dare not take any other solution. AA is there, and it's for him. If he becomes addicted to drugs, to take any drugs or the latest cures or anything else, he's doomed to destruction. And I suppose that the tragedy of members of AA at the present time is that so many of them have become addicted to drugs and they are dying one after the other because they refuse to accept the simple message of AA. There is no cure for the alcoholic. He is what he is. He has to accept himself as he is, and he has to live simply by those 12 steps. If he tries to complicate them in any way, he's going to lose sobriety. He dare not organize AA. And when I think of the history of the last 20 years of AA, we, the old members of AA, have done everything possible to wreck it, and have survived in spite of ourselves. And we accept that fact, that all we've got is our own sobriety, and what others care, think, or do is of no importance to us. As long as we ourselves can keep sober, that's all that matters. And to keep sober, I myself try to keep it as simple as possible. I'm indeed very, very grateful to AA. I'm indeed very grateful to the members of AA. I'm indeed very grateful to Father Richard Murphy, who did so much to inspire us in the early days. Very grateful to Archie McKinnon, who did so much also for us in the early days. And especially am I very grateful to Sturge Hardy, who was the only man in Sydney who had the courage to get up, stick to AA, and broadcast it over the stations he was attached to. He gave it wide publicity, and to him, and we're extremely grateful. Thank you very much.
Now I'd like to call on Father T, if he'd be so good as to come up.
Well, I'm Father Tom, and I'm an alcoholic, and I'm glad to be here tonight. And to brief matters, I would like to corroborate and consolidate with all those who have spoken tonight about those early days. Last Sunday, I think it was Channel 9, speaking about another institution, well known, and my association of it, mentioned the late Father Tom. And to many people of Australia, today I am dead. And I look very peaceful. And some of the compeers of that institution haven't buried me. I'm glad that AA has not buried me. And I thank Pauline and head office for calling me up so often to remind my not missing out tonight. Now, I'm thankful to God that I was associated with the early days. Associated with Father Richard, Dr. Minogue, and Archie, and Betty. I think of all the gratitude that would be, if it was anybody, that Betty had mothered us. We were nobody. We were nobody's darling. We wish we had somebody to love us, but there was none. And homelessness and friendlessness and more meal times than meals. Betty not only gave morale, but she gave of what she could ill afford. And so I bow my head, because I've seen a lot. I have been associated with a lot of people in want, in times of depression. And in the early days of AA, I think, like Bethlehem, And like Calvary, when it seemed to be a failure, and when everybody had fled, only a few women, I think the triumph of failure and the triumph of AA, when we were nobody's darling, I bow to those days more than I bow to you people here tonight who are so glamorized and so Hollywoodian and so irresistible looking. You don't carry me away. I know what it is to see days and have hungry men around you. And where were you to send them? It's not any good when a hungry man comes to you to talk religion to him. It's no good in saying, God bless you, and send him away hungry. But the early days make me shudder. And I thank God that I've seen the triumph of failure. Now, thanks to them all, and one of the first men of any consequence in the social world that allied themselves with us was Sturge. And I remember when Jack, long time passed on, came to me and told me there was a man on the radio and that he was a wonderful radio artist and that he was very taken with what he told him about AA. However, they've all been marvelous. And as Dr. Minogue has said tonight, we were all so strange and so different, yet out of our association together, called together by some strange process, there's a divinity that shapes our ends, rough hew them how we may, how such unity is here tonight. At any rate, I'm glad that I am alive, and I'm glad that I'm here tonight. And I wish you all every blessing and every health. And there's not much good in wishing you anything now, because you've got everything. There was a time when we had nothing, and we had no friends. Now we got the world at our feet. At any rate, a great Oxford graduate had a little prayer, and may I say it to you with my conclusion. May he support you all day long until the shades lengthen and the evening comes and the busy world is hushed and your work is done and your life is over. Then God, in his holy mercy, may he give you a safe lodgment and peace and happiness everlasting, and God love you all.
Pleasure in calling on our guest speaker for the night, someone who is well known to us all, Frank Sturge Hardy.
That's right, thank you. Well, thank you, Clive, and good evening, everyone, my friends of AA. Tonight I can't speak about the problem of alcoholism because I'm not qualified to do so. It isn't my fault. It's just that I wasn't an alcoholic. But I have had the privilege of 20 years experience with AA, and tonight I'd like to speak about the part of this wonderful movement that I have been able to incorporate into my own life, and that is the program of recovery. And the name, Alcoholics Anonymous, signifies both the problem and the solution. For, to me, anonymity sums up the whole program and explains in a very wonderful way how it works. By that I don't mean that I could analyze the processes, but I mean we realize that it works through humility and through this power greater than ourselves. Now, to the average person, the word anonymous stands for the fact that anonymity is a kind of mantle of charity that covers the alcoholic when he comes in to receive help from this movement. He is very conscious
of the fact that there's something wrong, but he has a feeling that no one seems to know about it. And he doesn't want anybody to know that he is coming into this movement. And so it's a wonderful thing that he can come into it and no one wants to know who he is, what he is. It doesn't matter what his social standing is. It doesn't matter what his financial position is. In fact, the only thing that matters to the members of AA is, do you want help? Have you got an alcoholic problem? And so he can come in anonymously. He can just give a name, Bill or Jack or whatever it may be, and no one wants to know any more about him except that he needs help and they want to give him friendship. So anonymity is the door of entrance through which men and women can come into this wonderful movement. But it is far more than that. If it were only that, it would be very remarkable. But it's much more than that. It's the philosophy that really explains the dynamics of this wonderful movement. You see, the first thing that has to happen when anyone comes into this movement is a great act of humility, and that is the admission of utter helplessness. To admit that one is utterly helpless and beaten is an act of humility. And then, if one remained there, well, then there'd be no hope, would there? You have to move on to the second step, and you have to admit that there's a power greater than yourself that can restore you to sanity. A power. Now, there you have an anonymous power. And I like to think of as the power behind AA as the anonymous God. For God is so often anonymous. Very few of us realize that every breath that we draw, that everything that we have is from Him. And for us, and for most of us, He is anonymous most of the time. And in AA, He is indeed anonymous. He is a God of 100 names, and every man can give Him his own name. But for so many, He remains anonymous. I suppose you know that there are many people who come into AA who cannot accept the fact that there is a supreme being. They cannot accept the fact of God. That doesn't mean that they are excluded from AA. It is explained to them, as long as you are prepared to admit that even the group is greater than yourself, a power greater than yourself, lean on the group. Surely you will admit that this group, these men and women who belong to this group, that they represent something bigger than yourself. And so the confessed atheist or agnostic will come in and he will take the power as his group. But the anonymous God is working through that group. And the time will come when his anonymity will be revealed to the seeker, and he will realize that there is a mysterious spiritual power behind this group. For nothing else can explain what happens. Nothing else can explain the miracle of sobriety but the working of a power greater than ourselves. Why is it that the psychiatrist couldn't find sobriety for you? Why isn't it that the love of your wife couldn't give you sobriety, or your husband, or for your children? It was only when you made that act of humility, confessing your utter helplessness and coming to believe in this anonymous God, that the miracle took place. And even if he continues to remain anonymous to you, he can still work that miracle, for he has abundant compassion and mercy, and his love is beyond understanding. But it goes further than that, this philosophy and anonymity. As in the 12th tradition, it says that anonymity is the spiritual foundation of this movement. Anonymity. You see, when a man or woman finds sobriety, the great temptation, when they are once more restored to society, and they are no longer needing to hide under the mantle of anonymity, and people know who they are. They know about this miracle that has taken place in their lives. And they enter what AA is called the honeymoon period, when they feel they've got to tell the world what has happened to them. And of course people congratulate them. They say, oh, you've done a wonderful thing, how you have rehabilitated yourself. And if any man or any woman allows that to remain in their minds, and they begin to think that they have done something, and they forget their first step, because a man and a woman who is a member of AA has got to take that first step continually. They've got to continually remember their utter dependence upon that anonymous power. If they begin to think that they have done it, well, it's the beginning of the end. It's only a matter of time, and they'll go back to where they were before. And perhaps the last state of that man is worse than the first, for there can be no return sometimes. And so you see, anonymity is so vital in the continuation of this wonderful gift, this miracle of sobriety. But anonymity goes further than that yet. As a man and a woman who have found sobriety, and they carry out the 12 steps, they never forget the gratitude that they owe to this movement. They never forget the need of others. They never forget that they were once in the position of those helpless ones who were wandering around seeking some way of escape from their horrible dilemma. And so they pass on the message. And they realize that to pass on the message effectively, they had best remain anonymous. Because if they go with a message as from themselves, the message loses its power. Because the secret of the message is that it is something that has been given to us and which we pass on. We're the channels through which it is passed on. And so the member of AA becomes, in a way, like one who came into the world to reveal the nature of God to men. It was the greatest fact in history, a breakthrough whereby God entered his universe, his world, and lived as man. And you know, it is written that he came into the world, and the world was made by him, and the world knew him not. He was anonymous. And he came unto his own, and his own received him not. He was anonymous. And so a member of AA becomes like that. He is glad to remain anonymous as a messenger. And like another very great man, the herald of the coming of God into the world, when he was asked who he was, he said, I'm only a voice. And that is the secret of the member of AA who is carrying the message. He is only a voice. What he is passing on is not his, it is something he has received, which has wrought a miracle in him. And so he is giving the most precious thing that he has, the secret of sobriety, to those who need it, as he once needed it. And I feel, and it's my experience of 20 years that makes me say this, I feel that those who faithfully follow those steps, and above all continue attending their meetings because of the opportunity it gives to carry out the 12th step of carrying the message, that they will eventually, even if they were agnostics or atheists, they will discover the name of the anonymous God. He is a God of 100 names, but the name that they will discover, I think, is perhaps the name that he loves best. His name is love. And it is written that God is love, and whoso dwelleth in love dwelleth in God, and God in him. Thank you.
Well, I'm sure we've all felt tonight a feeling of gratitude that has been with every speaker here on the platform. And I'd like to thank Sturge particularly for those last remarks in summing up the influence that is through AA. The traditions tell us that the only authority in AA is a loving God, as he